Welcome to this discussion about probation as it relates to commercial sexual exploitation of children, also known as CSEC. I'm so excited to be here with three incredible pioneers in this sector who I admire, and they are trailblazing best practices around the significant role of probation. So to get started, how about each of you introduce yourselves and share a little bit about what you're doing here in LA County?
So I'm Michelle Guyman. I'm with the Los Angeles County Probation Department, and I have the honor and privilege of being the director of our child trafficking unit and have been doing the work since about early 2011.
My name is Terica Wolfolk. I'm a deputy probation officer within the child trafficking unit with LA County Probation, and I've done so for the last 8 years.
I'm Catherine Pratt. I'm a judge for the Los Angeles Superior Court. I supervise kids on probation and juvenile justice and have a specialized docket for commercially sexually exploited children.
Okay, great. So let's go ahead and jump right in. I'd like to ask you all, how can the courts provide support to this population?
You know, it's really kind of a sensitive issue because in many ways these kids are victims of trauma and victims of violence, and yet we are putting them on probation. They've been accused of crimes. So I think it's really important when working with them that we acknowledge that they have been victims as well as other aspects of their background, and are sensitive to that, are supportive, are positive, and really focus on their futures as opposed to their past.
Do either of you want to add to that, or?
I also think the court that we have in Los Angeles specifically has made quite an impact on the kids because, you know, Judge Pratt sees them quite often. Normally, judges will see their kids, their youth on probation once or twice a year or whenever they're in violation of maybe their probation. But in this specific court, Judge Pratt sees the youth once every 6 weeks, which I think makes a huge impact, especially with regards to relationships and building a support system.
Can you discuss the cycle of returning to the life and how not to get discouraged when working with kids?
Young people return to the life for, I think, a variety of reasons. I think it's about love, it's about fear, oftentimes, and I think, to be quite honest, that oftentimes the system has let them down because we just haven't been there and shown up for them when we needed to. And I think the biggest thing we can do to help them move forward and not be discouraged is just understanding that we're there to plant seeds every day and that trauma takes time, and to be patient and really walk alongside of young people and not rush their healing.
As a probation officer, it was hard at first. But it took a while. You have to understand that it's a process, and their trauma and getting through their trauma is a process. And so once I took myself out of the equation and my goals for them and understood them and their goals and their process through this journey, you step back and you meet them where they're at and you support them where they're at. And so it took some time, but I realized that it's their journey and I'm here to support them through their journey.
Sure.
It's tough to learn that. I agree with Terica that it takes time. You also have to remind yourself of that from time to time because you can lose focus of it. And so there are times that I have to remind myself, this is not about me. They did not make this choice because they were, trying to send a message to me or be disrespectful of me. They were doing it for their own reasons.
So when we talk about taking a strengths-based approach to providing services, our objective is to not view the youth based upon their abuses or their circumstances, but based upon their possibilities. So how does that affect a young person's recovery?
Well, for me, it was actually the thing that comes to mind is a training that you did for Los Angeles County.
Okay.
And there was a part of that training where you really kind of talked a little bit about labels. And I think when we first started doing the work and throughout this time over the past few years, we've really focused on them being victims of commercial sexual exploitation instead of seeing them as kids first, and really understanding that sometimes labels can really hold kids back. And so really, if we can take that away and see them as young people first, and the possibilities of the things that they can champion and the things that can happen, I think that helps them move along in that journey.
it's empowering. And I always like to take it back to what are your dreams and your goals and your aspirations. And I let them talk to me and tell me what it is that they like and their hobbies. And once we get back to that, we can, that's the first place to start with your case planning.
Sure.
Is to start what do you want to do? What do you like? Right. And it's empowering for them, for someone to ask them what it is they want to do and what it is they like.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's an important part of the process, is that we focus on their future, and we also encourage them to focus on their future. They, first of all, have been pretty pessimistic about their future, and perhaps more importantly, because so many of these kids have been raised within the system, they're not used to even having the freedom to make decisions about what they want to do and what they like and don't like. And it takes a little, encouragement for them to learn to focus on those things. I think it's very important to give them that sense of agency back into their lives.
Absolutely. Thank you. So we know that this cycle of abuse and exploitation can take time to break. And so can you talk about what some of the long-term needs are of a young person who's experienced commercial sexual exploitation?
I think the bottom line is it's about relationships. I think that there are a lot of programs that are very helpful, but the bottom line is that you need to work on establishing trust with the child and being consistent for them and being there for them and showing them that there is someone who will care when they are having a good day and when they're having a bad day. Typically, that's not the role of a judge or a law enforcement officer or a probation officer. So it really does require you to kind of take on a new role. It's very important for them.
And I think it's important to, once they age out of the system, that they're connected into the community. Because if we're talking about long-term, so we connect them to community-based organizations, churches. It's important that they continue to build relationships because they're going to need long-term support. So just understanding that and making sure that they reach out to someone other than just you, that they understand that there's, many services out there for them to attach to.
That's great. Mm-hmm. Did you want to add to that, or?
Yeah, I just think that we talk a lot about, what is the intervention, and we constantly talk about that relationships are the intervention. Mm-hmm. And one of the things, again, doing the work and also just watching the relationships that are built among the probation officers and the youth that they're working with. It's always really great to hear kids, or young people when they're, a little bit older, 21, 22, that reach back and ask for things. And they can be simple things, but just knowing that they have someone that they've connected with that they can reach back to, I think is just super important.
Absolutely. So we know that everyone has different coping mechanisms when they experience trauma. So I'd really love to hear you all explain why it's so important not to expect for each survivor to respond to the trauma of commercial sexual exploitation the same way.
Well, I think when dealing with trauma, everyone experiences trauma differently, so they're going to cope with trauma differently. And I think it's really important to know that just, one thing is not going to fix everything, or one type of intervention or one type of focus is not going to, do it for all young people. But that it's an individual process for each one because they are individuals.
Absolutely.
I think it's really important to keep that in mind when you're working with the kids, because what works for one child doesn't necessarily work for another. When I first started this, I thought my goal for the kids was to get them back into mainstream schools, that they could go back to a regular high school, have a normal high school experience. And I've learned over the years that that's not necessarily a good thing for all of the kids. Some of the kids really don't want to go back into that environment. There's a lot of social pressure there that they may or may not want to be participating in. So I think it's important to just look at the individual child and what's best for her.
So one of the things that we frequently discuss in this field is the reality that recycling back through different stages of change is a common occurrence with this population. So in light of that, how do you handle setbacks with survivors?
Well, I think the way we handle setbacks is just understanding that relapse is going to happen or possibly will happen. And just really being understanding of that and not be discouraged or let the young people feel like they failed. I think that's something we work really hard on, is to message to them that we understand it's a journey and that this, this is just a part of that healing journey.
And for our audience, could you clarify what some of those setbacks could be?
I think sometimes we have young people who might be in foster care or in other places, and they start to work on healing and doing things, and then they go back home sometimes where there might not be that supportive environment, or that we haven't attached them to community supports, and so sometimes that feeling of not being supported, maybe in those natural environments, might be a setback. It could be that, possibly an exploiter has gone to jail and is now returning, or there are expectations about young people and going to different events, and so we see sometimes young people who have been stable in foster care for 6 months, 8 months, and then all of a sudden there's a big event where there's this expectation that they have to go. And so sometimes there are those setbacks, and then sometimes, again, when we don't follow through with things, or even just young people having their just basic needs met, sometimes can be a setback.
Sure. Judge Pratt?
One of the important issues that often triggers kids and inspires setbacks is one that, in my mind, is very much dependent on the system, and the system needs to improve. And that is how these kids get treated when they are asked to testify in the adult criminal case against their traffickers. That's a very traumatic experience for someone. You have someone who has been a victim of a sexual assault, who has been a domestic violence victim, who has been a victim perhaps of gang violence, and all of those things together make it very intimidating for her to testify. And I think that people need to be very aware of that, and it's very challenging to support kids through that process.
Thank you for pointing that out, because I think sometimes people think, let's put the bad guy away without a reflection on how it's going to impact the young person. Terika, did you have anything you wanted to add in the setback?
Adding to what Judge Pratt was stating about testifying, oftentimes that is the time we will have a girl that has been stable for 6 months, 8 months, and she has to testify, and it unravels at that moment. Either she runs away from placement. That is a huge trigger for her. And just the whole courtroom experience is a trigger.
Okay.
And so that's a major setback.
Okay. Now, what are some of the recommendations based on your professional experiences of what not to do or to say to a survivor?
I think going back to what I said earlier is we have to get away from just seeing them as commercially sexually exploited children, and we have to get back to seeing them first and their strengths and how amazing they are in order to help them move forward. And so I think anything that's kind of negative or constantly reminds them of who they are sometimes keeps them stuck from moving forward.
One of the things I learned early on is that sometimes when a kid has been gone for a while, she's been AWOL, we don't know where she is, she's been on the street, and she comes back to court. And I noticed that there are a lot of situations in which I was pretty surprised at how tired she looked or how beaten up she looked and that sort of thing. And I really had to train myself not to react to that. So when I made myself have a uniform way of responding to the kids at that moment. And what I always say is, it is good to see you. I'm glad to know you're safe. And I don't ask the details. That's not important at that moment. You just want to be reassuring.
Beautiful. So in your experience, what are some of the most impactful parts of recovery and healing that you've seen so far?
Well, I think one of the things that we've done, which has been pretty remarkable, is we've hosted for now 8 years an empowerment activity, an empowerment conference actually that we do every year. And I think it's really great to have, survivors working with survivors and coming and sharing experiences, and really just having a group of, survivor allies and allies just really surrounding kids. And also we do a lot of different monthly empowerment conferences. And so I think the young people really spoke out about wanting to stay connected and wanting to kind of find that support system amongst everyone. So I think that's one of the things that we've done that's been really positive and been impactful for young people.
It also gives the kids an opportunity to see their probation officer or their lawyer or their judge in a different context and as a real person, and to start to relate to them and realize that that's all part of their community that they can, access when they need to.
Okay. And outside of the empowerment conference, which is phenomenal, and I've been quite a few times myself, what else have you seen that's been innovative along the lines of recovery and healing?
I think one of the other things that I would say that's been really positive in their recovery is education. One of the things that we have with our multidisciplinary team through our probation MDT in the court is that we have educational liaisons from the school districts. And when young people realize that they are so close to graduating, it kind of gives them this boost and spark of hope, like I can really accomplish something, like I can really get my high school diploma. And I think that's a really positive thing, because these kids need accomplishments, they need a win, and they need something that they feel like, that they're at the end for. And so I think our educational advocates have been really instrumental in helping them do their credit recovery and really letting them know that you're really close, and graduation is really near. And I think we have anywhere from probably 15 to 25 kids a year graduating from high school, which I think is pretty remarkable, especially because these young people have been in and out of so many different places, and their lives feel chaotic, but it's been really, I think, positive just educationally.
One of the things that I really appreciate about what I've seen as we fight this cause is the unity that I've seen around it. I know we all have our different philosophies and different approaches depending on what aspect of the field we're in, but what are some of the successful partnerships that you've witnessed, the successful collaborations that have helped make doing this work easier to grapple with?
I think that there can be successful collaborations with a lot of different agencies, any child serving agencies, and at different points we've had a lot of luck with folks from public health, from mental health, a lot of different places. But I think that the really successful collaborations are ones where the individuals, the professional individuals, relate to each other well and relate to the kids well. And that is going to be, some lawyers are good at that, some lawyers aren't. This is, in my mind, it's really tough work. It's not for everybody. And I think it's important that, people really be dedicated to it and inspired by it if they're going to be spending time with it.
And I think one of the other partnerships, a couple of other partnerships that are really critical to the issue, and I'll start with, we did a lot of training in the beginning. And I think just our partners with survivor leaders who are instrumental in helping us bring the issue forward and talking about just all the dynamics around the issue, and really training and making people aware. And then also the advocacy agencies that we work with, because they're a non-system person. And so a lot of times youth will gravitate to them because they have this, a different perspective. And I think working, again, together on the issue is critical, because the needs of the youth are just so big that you just can't do the work alone.
Absolutely.
Weekly, we have our multidisciplinary team, and at that table, we have our public defender's office, the alternate public defender, we have public health, we have the social workers, we have our advocacy agencies. And so just talking about each case is, just all of us in support of the youth, even though we have different disciplines, like you stated, there to support that one youth is amazing. And also, our probation officers and social workers attend meetings at the group home in which the youth is a part of it. And that's also empowering for the youth to be involved in the effort, and they get their voice heard in that meeting and their case planning. So they're also a part of their own case planning. So I think that's very impactful.
That's amazing. Michelle, a few moments ago, you mentioned the importance of survivor-based leadership. So could you elaborate a little bit more on that and why it's important that survivors are at the forefront?
Yes, because I think there's no replacement for lived experience. I've seen young people, when we've had survivor leaders, like come and talk with them and be a part of their life, that just instantly have that connection. And I think a lot of our young people need to be able to look up and see that, I can heal from this and I can do great things. And we have a lot of great survivor leaders that are doing amazing things and great things that are truly inspirations for our young people. And I think you just can't do the work without survivors in the movement, for sure.
Thank you.
One of the things that I've noticed is that at a certain point in the recovery, a lot of the kids will express that they want to be a survivor leader, and that is really inspiring for them. And I think about it and I think it's a way for them to turn all of those hard experiences, those painful experiences, into something useful. It can be helpful to someone else. So I think it is a very positive way for them to look at what they've been through.
Terica, you mentioned about the importance of involving a young person who's experienced commercial sexual exploitation in case planning. So in considering that, what happens when survivors are not included in leadership when we're talking about this issue? What happens when that happens, and how can advocates support survivor leadership? And you all are free to answer that question.
Well, to be quite honest, I think it is really problematic when we don't acknowledge their leadership skills. These kids are really good at being leaders. That is one of their strengths. And if we don't cultivate it in a positive way, they will develop it in ways that aren't as positive. And so one of the things that you hear a lot about kids in the system is that when you get a bunch of these commercially sexually exploited kids together, some will recruit the others to come into the life. That's very real. That happens all the time. You're not going to avoid that. You just need to channel that in a different direction.
Absolutely. And I think those of us with lived experience can attest to the fact that we experienced that when we were in that situation where we were recruiting and our leadership skills were used in negative ways. But then you can develop them and obviously become an incredible asset to the movement. So considering that, can you share some successes? What are some of your favorite success stories when working with this population?
Well, one young person recently comes to mind, and she was actually not even on probation. She was more on the child welfare side. Okay. But through our empowerment conferences and our empowerment activities, we just get to know all the kids. And so she's a young woman who was pretty entrenched at one point, pretty bold about this, and pretty well known in Los Angeles. And now she's living in Arizona and she's working and she's just doing a really great job. And she reached out to us recently, to get some uniforms for her job. And I'm glad that she was able to reach out to us and knew that we would be there for her. And she sent us a picture of her in her new uniform when she got it, and just thanked us. And when I showed one of our law enforcement officers her picture, he got pretty emotional. Because he couldn't believe it was her. Oh, wow. Because he thought she was still on the street. Wow. And just to see how far she had come, and she also said, he asked if she could, if he could send her name along to one of the detectives, and she said yes, and please let everyone know that because everyone didn't give up. And they kept pouring love into me. This is where I am today, and this is why I am today.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
One of the things that's ringing through my mind as you're sharing that, Michelle, is just we talk about the system and the need for systemic change, but the reality is in many ways you all are the family that these kids need. And it might not look like a traditional family unit, right? Having a probation officer or a judge, but they get to experience what it's like to be reparented and to be honored and to be restored with dignity. So thank you so much. Thank you for that.
One of our girls who went through the program early on, and she's now about 23. I was very proud of her because when we had a recent empowerment event, she catered the dinner for us. So there were 100, adults and kids, and she came back and she catered a great dinner for everyone. Wow. And I just was really proud of her and really happy to see her able to do that.
Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful.
I've had the opportunity to see girls succeed over the years. Many different girls. They've gone on to college or they've become parents, and just to know the impact that we have and knowing that they know that we're still there for them. And even the girls that are not as successful and they're still on their journey, I appreciate the fact that they still reach out. They still know that Ms. Wolfalk, they may be 25. They know that I'm at the Compton Courthouse and that they can come and get support when they need it. They know that they can reach out and get back on track and get resources. And it's a journey. And so just understanding that journey and the impact that we're making is just amazing to continue that.
Beautiful, beautiful. So the final question I'd like to ask is, based on your experiences, what are the good qualities of an advocate?
I think someone that the youth can relate to,
okay.
that an understanding person. Like I said, it takes a special person to work with this population, and so our advocates have been amazing. And so just being understanding, caring, loving, and supporting, and the kids need to know that you support them. And so those are all the aspects of a good advocate, in my opinion.
Great.
I think it requires flexibility too, because the kids change and grow a lot, and they go through a lot of ups and downs. And someone once explained it to me that it's not necessarily a linear process, and some of us are trained in our professions to expect things to be linear, and that's not how things go for these kids. So you just have to be flexible and aware of that.
And patient.
Yes.
Right.
Patient, understanding the journey and what that looks like and the stages of change. So really being trauma informed and understanding that
Yes.
is that patience. I can't stress that enough. The patience.
And I think just overall showing up. Again, I think it's nice when young people know that if they call, sometimes their needs are at 11 o'clock at night, and when people are available and show up, I think that makes a big difference, because again, sometimes we haven't shown up in the past, and so young people don't, and I think that's a part of trust, building trust that you are going to be there for me, and showing up in the difficult times. It's always easy to show up in the easy times, but showing up when things are tough and not convenient. I know that the advocates have just really been instrumental when kids have to testify, in court. Just being there on the stand, being next to them during a very scary and difficult time, I think has always been really important to them, and we appreciate that as well.
I think part of the important aspects to having an advocate is just to have that community-based asset. The system itself is big and it's bureaucratic, and to some degree we're never going to overcome those limitations. So I think we have to partner with the community-based organizations, because they can be more flexible, they can be more responsive, and I think that that's an important partnership, and people need to be willing to engage that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for answering these questions today, ladies. This has been an amazing discussion. We hope that this panel has helped you understand more about the significant role that probation officers and our court system has in these kids' journeys. And I want to say thank you to our esteemed panelists. Thank you for the incredible work that you're doing in this community. And thank you all for taking the time to listen to this discussion.